Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 1, Episode 15. I'm Bethany, your host, and today I'm joined by YouTubers Alan from the Library of Allenxandria and Alex Nieves to discuss whether Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter is amazing or not great. You're going to hear both sides, but first, if you want to support the podcast and get early access to episodes and exciting bonus content from all of our guests, check out our Patreon linked in the show notes. And as an added bonus, anyone who joins as a patron at the Trope Fiend level and above between now and May 1st will receive a custom Chapter 3 podcast logo sticker and a mystery book in the mail. So check that out. Big thank you to all of our patrons and a special shout out to our world-expanding patron, Trina. Your support makes this possible. Before our conversation today, it's time for On My Radar, where I'll share some recent or upcoming book releases in science fiction, fantasy, and romance that I'm excited about, and then our guests will have the opportunity to share one as well. The books for today's episode will be released between April 14th and April 27th, 2021, with the exception of the guest recommendations, which may include any upcoming release. First, on April 20th, I've got 3 books to tell you about. We have The Last Watch by J.S. Dews coming out. This one is a sci-fi adventure that's being pitched as The Expanse meets Game of Thrones, where a handful of soldiers stand between humanity and annihilation. Now, Game of Thrones is definitely overused as a comparison title, in my opinion. However, this does still sound intriguing, and I'm interested. Next up, we have Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart. This one is a Jamaican-inspired fantasy debut about 2 enemy witches who must enter into a deadly alliance to take down a common enemy. The cover on this one is stunning, and so far I'm hearing some good things about it. And then lastly, for April 20th, we have These Feathered Flames by Allenxandria Overy. This one is a queer retelling of The Firebird, a Russian folktale. It follows twin heirs, one fated to become queen, one to train in magic, but then everything changes when their mother is killed. So those all sound really interesting. Then April 27th, I got 2 titles to talk about. First up, Fugitive Telemetry by Martha Wells is the latest book in the Murderbot Diaries. I am a huge fan of this series. This is where we follow everyone's favorite snarky AI murderbot on spacey adventures. Very character-driven sci-fi. I love it. It makes me laugh. I don't know the details of the plot of this one, but I really love the series. And the last book I want to call your attention to is a romance. This one is An Earl, the Girl, and a Toddler by Vanessa Riley. This is a slow burn historical romance from one of the few Black authors writing Regency romance, although we're starting to see some more come up. And she centers BIPOC characters. She writes characters you can root for while also tackling the complex issues of race, colonialism, and privilege as they related to people during that time period and the gentry, which is complicated, and props to her for tackling it. With that said, please join me in welcoming Alan and Alex to the show. Thank you guys for joining me.
Woo.
Thanks for having me.
I want a mystery book.
You want a mystery book?
Well, hey, you can join the Patreon and get one.
Get me a mystery book.
Yeah, and a sticker.
Yes.
That first book you mentioned, though, The Last Watch, sounds super interesting. But yeah, the Expanse meets Game of Thrones. Where have I heard that before?
I'm sure somewhere.
Any space book with politics.
Right,
Yeah.
of course. I like politics in my sci-fi.
It has a super cool cover, though.
It does, yeah. And I think the second one's coming out soon after, too. It seems like they're releasing them soon, like close together.
Awesome.
Yeah. So if you guys want to briefly introduce yourselves to our listeners and share your pick for an exciting upcoming release.
Go ahead, Alan.
Okay. I am Alan. My channel is the Library of Allenxandria. I am now a veteran on this podcast, having done one prior to now. And my pick is... what did I do? Fall of Babel last time? Okay, so This time it's Play of Shadows by Sebastian de Castell. This is going to be a new book starting a new series set in the Greatcoats universe. The main character is the son of 2 Greatcoats. I don't know if they're going to be Greatcoats we know or if it's going to be completely random Greatcoats. It's coming out in June. I don't know when in June. I used to know the date, but now I look at Amazon and it says June 2050. And I'm assuming
sounds about right.
I'm going to assume that it's George R.R. Martin is not writing it, so I'm going to assume it's coming out before the next 29 years. So
we certainly hope so.
Yeah, it's coming out in June sometime. But I love Sebastian de Castell. I love the Greatcoats, and so I am super excited to revisit that world.
Great.
Definitely a good one. Goodreads says June 24th. So
sweet.
Okay.
Thanks.
I guess we'll
Hopefully.
take that as gospel. Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Nieves. which is also my channel name. I talk about sci-fi and fantasy, and getting into a lot more sci-fi this year, but fantasy is where my heart belongs. The book I'm looking forward to is actually also an arc that I have, which is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, which is book 1 of the Bloodsworn saga. We've been actually doing collaborations about John Gwynne's Faithful and the Fallen series, and his fantasy is fantastic, epic fantasy that also gets compared to Game of Thrones. But it's super digestible and easy to read. It's great epic fantasy where there's not a lot of fluff, like a Wheel of Time or a Malazan, something like that. And Bloodsworn is actually Norse-based. It honestly reminds me a lot more of the First Law, whereas it's not like a gigantic sweeping epic fantasy. You have a couple different POVs, it's smaller character-focused stories, but if you've seen the cover by now, there is a gigantic dragon on it.
The cover is so cool.
It's an amazing
gorgeous
cover.
And it's incredible. But yeah, so that comes out May 4th, and I already have it pre-ordered in hardcover, so that looks super, super awesome.
And Alex, apparently, information, the Greatcoats book happens less than a year after Tyrant's Throne. So
less than a year?
Yeah, he says it on Goodreads. He responded. So we'll see Kest Brasti and Falkio in that book.
How is it even okay? So then the kid of a greatcoat has to be like an old greatcoat.
Correct.
Then. Yeah, because I initially we talked about it before. I thought it was going to be like one of the pairs at the end, kind of like went and had a kid, and it was going to be like 20 years later. That's interesting.
It's going to be cool.
Cool. I still need to read that series.
Oh my gosh, read it.
I know. I have the first. I have the audiobook for the first one. I just haven't gotten to it yet. Okay. There's always so much to read, but
ignore chapter 23 when it happens. Just skip past it. Just skip past chapter 23, and you will love the series.
Yeah, it never happened.
Just skip that chapter.
Pretend it doesn't exist.
Seriously.
Got it. So I'm assuming this is sort of like the Court of Frost and Starlight for Sarah J. Maas fans. I just pretend that doesn't exist.
Yes, do that, because that single chapter makes people never read any more of the books, and it makes me so sad.
Yeah.
It includes the greatest love story ever told.
It does not. It includes the worst love story.
Noted.
All
right. So tonight we're going to talk about Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. And I read the first book pretty recently, and I thought this would be an interesting episode just because it seems to be such a polarizing book.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know. And in case anybody is wondering, the reason I have specifically asked Alex and Alan to join me is we're going to give you both sides of it. One of them loves this book, one of them does not. I liked it, but still have critiques of it. So we're going to have some interesting conversations. But yeah, I've heard people who hated it. I've heard people who love it and rave about it. So I think it's an interesting one to talk about. To give you guys a little bit of background on it, in case you're not familiar, Rage of Dragons was a book by a debut author. It's an African-inspired epic fantasy story that's kind of a revenge story. It's got lots of action in it. And maybe I'll let you guys each kind of give your, if you were going to describe what this book is about briefly, how would you do it?
You go ahead, Alex.
Okay, so, I mean, it's very much a revenge tale. That is the heart of this book, is Tau getting revenge for a death that he has, happened to him early on in the book. And the entire story revolves around sort of his rage and dealing with the caste system that he's a part of as a lesser in the society, where they're basically treated like total garbage by all of the nobles and even petty nobles that aren't even the highest on the totem pole. So he is fighting against that system and trying to sort of take revenge against the society that has oppressed him and his people and directly affected his life. And if you like action-packed fantasy, this has all the action. This is like an action movie, but in book form. It does not let up ever. It's absolutely balls to the wall, just action all the time, and I loved it.
So if you couldn't tell, Alex is our Rage of Dragons fan tonight. So
that's me.
Alan.
Are we going to be able to talk spoilers in this thing?
Yeah, let's talk spoilers.
Okay, cool.
It's been out long enough.
Yeah, that's fine. Maybe not for book 2.
Oh, I haven't read book 2 yet.
Okay, great. So book 1.
No, when we talk about the things that I don't like, I will not be able to talk about it without spoilers.
Okay.
But I think it's fine. Like, I didn't hate this book, but I think this is a lot of really good ideas that were not executed well. And that is my issue. It is a revenge tale, which is fine. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with a revenge tale. And there is a lot of battle scenes, which is fine. I like military fantasy. But like, I didn't buy the motive for revenge. Like, it just didn't, I wasn't invested. I wasn't invested in his revenge tale for the reasons that he was giving. He never, like, Tao, the main character, never stops and ponders what he's doing. Like, we're never in his head. He never's like, if he cares so much about the death of his dad, which is the inciting incident, sorry, spoilers, but you did warn him. If he cares so much, why don't you ever think about it? Like, he never thinks about it. And it's just, and then there's barely any dragons.
Blinded by rage.
I mean, I guess.
I mean,
but,
and trauma, you know.
I mean, yes, but I read traumatic characters all the time who think about their trauma. And it's just like the explanation of the world building, like the use of the what's the girl's name? Zuri to explain the world. And then, like, I thought it focused on things that were less interesting than what I think it should have focused on. Like, I think that the last part of it was really interesting because it dealt with, like, the politics and the Tao's people as conquerors.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff was really interesting. And it's not that I didn't find Tao's quest for revenge interesting. I just wasn't super invested. And it also strained my credulity. And it's a fantasy book, I know. And I was doomed from the beginning because I hated the first 50 pages of this book. Probably more than I hated any 50 pages of any book I read last year.
What? Why?
Okay, because Amazon likes to send me books that don't work. So Amazon sent me a book that did not have the last chapter or the glossary. So the first 50 pages are laden with buzzwords. Like ongenyama. What the crap is an ongenyama? I don't know what that is.
Malazan fan.
Oh no! Do you think that's not one of my problems that I have with Malazan? But Malazan includes a dictionary in the back, and so the problem is there was a dictionary, and I thought the first 50 pages were really clunkily written. And so I had very difficult time kind of figuring out what was going on. The lack of the glossary wounded me. And so I just really could not find my footing. And I thought the beginning was badly written, in my opinion. And by the time that corrected itself, I was still so mad about the first 50 pages.
Holding on to a grudge.
Correct. It's my revenge story, Alex. That I don't think I ever forgave it. And so I was examining it so critically after just feeling so adrift with those first 50 pages. So I am not saying that I don't have some of my reasons for not liking it are stupid and probably just like based on just being frustrated at the time. Some of the things that we'll talk about later, I legitimately didn't like, but I think I was looking at it more critically than I normally would read, especially with a debut novel, just because I was like, how did this get published? Who read this? Who edited this? Did someone edit this? Why are these sentences this way? What's an ongenyama? So I was just lost for the first 50 pages. I was so enraged.
Interesting. It's interesting because I think my issues are different ones. I didn't have so much that problem. I think because I'm used to reading books that have terms that they don't necessarily explain right away, and I can just kind of like go with it. And
you just have to accept it.
Yeah, like I just kind of go with it and figure they'll tell me eventually. I don't know. But like part of that I think is maybe differences in how you read. So I actually ended up enjoying it more than I thought I would. I was nervous going in because I had heard it was so action-packed, and I am usually not a big fan of really action-driven fantasy. It's not my favorite version of it. But I ended up liking this quite a bit because I felt like a lot of times the action scenes were doing something that told me more about the magic system or told me more about the world or the social class system or something like that. And so it kind of worked for me. My biggest issue with this book, it was the way that he handled female characters, and we can get into that. But
that is a very fair critique that even I have.
Yeah.
I was blinded by the adrenaline pumping action that I so loved. But
I thought the bath scene was your favorite, Alex.
Oh, that's by far the greatest love story ever told. But as soon as he talked about sheathing the sword, that was
God.
That really gripped me. But no, I wasn't really lost by the prologue or like the beginning. It's definitely more detached from the story because it's a totally different setting and time and characters, and it's sort of I could see somebody being frustrated simply because it almost gives you like a false sense of what it's going to be about.
That's true.
But it didn't bother me because I was just like, oh, this is cool. Like there's all this stuff happening and there's dragons and this woman is able to call dragons and burn everybody. And there's this big battle. And I remember laughing because when I sat down to read it, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to remember some character names. And the first like 5 characters that are named immediately die. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm not going to bother anymore. It was like, here's Jim, and then Jim gets his head cut off. I'm like, okay, there's Jim. John gets an axe to the face. I was just like, okay, everyone's going to die. I'm just going to read this and just keep going.
Oh, man. Yeah, I think the funny thing is that you get more dragons in the prologue than you get in almost 100%. The entire rest of the book, despite the name. Sure. So, like... Yeah.
But see, so the reason that doesn't bother me, though, is because Rage of Dragons is, like, the book title means more than just, hey, there's literally just going to be dragons flying around. Like, that's...
But I mean, it literally says Rage of Dragons. Like, you're expecting dragons if that's
there are dragons in it. It's barely. Just a deeper.
But also remember that one of the military units is called a Rage.
Yes, that is true.
But you do get more of like behind the scenes of what is actually going on with the dragons. It's not like it's just dragons are existing in the world and people are just flying them into battle, and it's just not really what it was.
Yeah,
I will say the sequel does more with this title than this book does.
Interesting.
So for all the people that complain about it, it's better in the second one as far as that exact thing. But it didn't, I don't know, I took the rage more of just talking about Tao because he's a giant rage monster.
Yeah, he is.
Talking about Tao, like, okay, Tao's like, again, part of the issue. Like, once the story gets going, I'm really kind of fine. Like the training, I love that stuff. I love the duels. I love all that. But Tao's dumb. Tao's a dumb character, and people keep Alex, you and people like you keep using that as a defense of Tao. Like, yeah, he's supposed to be dumb. He's the worst. Like he's a dumb character. He's just like,
but like he's a teen boy. Like, I think
normally I don't like those characters.
Well, there you go. I mean, like when I was reading it, though, I was like, yeah, this is like a teen boy.
So, I mean, even I can understand. Like, I got frustrated with Tao at times, but at the same time, like, I was so hyped for him to just go fight people that I'm like, oh my god, you're an idiot, but like, definitely just jump into battle blindly and kill people because it's super cool.
That's so funny.
But Alan, like, did you enjoy Rin as a character in the Poppy War?
No, that's been part of my contention. No, I don't like her either.
There you go. I think you maybe just don't like people driven by their feelings.
Well, the thing is, I like Rin more because Rin is at least introspective. I do like the fact that Rin at least considers what she is doing. I just don't like that Tao is this. He goes from this like, oh, I'm gonna run away and we're gonna go and I'm never gonna go to war to like. Fighting, and the reason his dad gets killed is so dumb.
It's his fault. I mean, but again, that could have been handled better. I will say that it's like when people talk about Lord of the Rings, like, oh, why didn't they just call the eagles to begin with? They could have just flown to Mordor. It's like, well, there wouldn't be a book.
Yeah.
Yes, because the book has to happen.
Something had to happen to drive him to do this. Yeah, it probably could have been handled better because literally in that scene, it's like, just literally stop talking. And your dad doesn't die.
Correct.
But I think that just kind of goes to show the character that you're going to set up for, because that's him through most of the book. Is like
he's impulsive,
just kind of
he's hormonal,
he's super impulsive, very hormonal, self-centered.
Yeah.
And again, we do have to remember this is a debut novel. It was originally self-published before it was picked up by Orbit. which I didn't know at the time. But I mean, so, you know, I do want to give Evan Winter the benefit of the doubt. There's just some things that just made, I was just like, whatever. Now, again, there were large swaths of it that I liked. I liked his crew. I liked, what's his boss's name? Jayed? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Jayed. Like, I like that stuff. I like Hadith. You know, I like the fighting. It's just some things I'm just like, what?
Yeah, I thought the magic system was really interesting.
Yeah.
I love the magic system.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool, and I liked exploring that. And I liked the social commentary, I guess, I think was really interesting. Although, again, and this is a whole thing, my biggest issue with this is I was like, okay, I see what you're doing, and I like this. However, can we not have a fully fleshed out female character who has her own like goals and motivations?
We cannot.
And doesn't
she needs to explain things.
For
Zuri was Mrs. Exposition Dump.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which was my main problem with this book, which I will say again, I think the second book does better.
That's good to know.
I think he learned from that. I don't agree with people that think Zuri was a great character because I don't see how. She was basically there to explain to Tao and the reader how things work. So I mean, she was definitely a useful character. I could see the argument saying that Zuri is the reason that Tao is who he is and actually like improves and learns how to, you know, go to Isihogo and fight demons and understands kind of how that all works. But she was mainly there to give you paragraphs of how things work.
Yeah.
So she definitely could have been fleshed out more. Yeah. And I mean, she's definitely the most prevalent female character in the book, if I'm not mistaken. And the rest of them don't really get much. I mean, to be fair, not a lot of other characters get a whole lot of time in this book. It's really, really focused on Tao.
Yeah. I do think beyond just that, though, that like, you know, while I don't think that this was malicious, I do think that the way he created the society has a lot of misogyny kind of baked into the premise.
Sure.
And so it's a little odd to me because it's set up where I'm like, okay, you kind of have a matriarchy because you have a queen, except that it's really patriarchal and misogynistic, and the men still have all the power, and the women can only fight through dragons and magic, which I'm like, okay. Like, you know, like, and you're creating a fantasy world. Like, so I'm curious to see what he does in book 2, because I did think it was interesting that the barbarians had women fighting. Yeah. And so I hope that he's going to challenge that in the future, but in this book, it's not really challenged.
Yeah. Having not read the second one, the thing is, despite the fact that I did not really love Rage of Dragons, I still want to read Fires of Vengeance and see where it goes.
Yeah, I want to read it too.
Especially since my main problems with Rage of Dragons will not persist into Fires of Vengeance. My biggest problem was what appeared to me as inconsistent world building within the rules that Evan Winter has made for his own world. It just felt like Tao got to break them with no explanation at all, which is just irritating. So the biggest thing, and Alex has heard me say it before, a lot of people's problem is the fact that is how Tao powers up. And I'm not saying is it earned or unearned. There's a whole big to-do about that. My problem is that in the opening pages and in the early fights, we watch the nobility, who we have been led to understand are genetically superior. Their minds are more powerful. They are just genetically superior to the lessers. They die one time in Isihogo from the demons finding them while they're using their magic, and their minds explode and they go catatonic, right? At no point does Evan Winter explain how Tao, a lesser, can die thousands of times without losing his mind. The answer that I get is
because he's so angry.
The answer I get is like, well, he's hallucinating. He is seeing things. No. That's not the same as going catatonic. And if it was like a dozen times, I might buy it because of his rage. But it literally says thousands of times. how are you becoming inoculated to being, I mean, maybe he is becoming inoculated to being murdered, but it was just so, when I read it, and I didn't know it was coming, but when I read it, I was like, what? While also acknowledging, I will give the people who like it, I acknowledge that's freaking cool. Like, that is a cool premise. I completely,
going to the underworld to fight demons.
I mean, it is really cool.
Correct. When time does not pass there, so you can train infinitely. Yeah. That is really cool.
It is.
But at the same time, I'm like, what? Like, and if he hadn't established earlier with the nobles that dying in Isihogo blows up your brain, if he hadn't established that, I would also be all right. But it seems like he establishes this thing like, oh, we got to be afraid of that. And then just says, yeah, you know, it'd be cooler if I just ignored that. And
well, so like, come on, bro. They're afraid of it because it does happen to most people. It's not like a 100% guarantee. But also to your point about like him being inoculated to it, he does kind of, if I remember correctly, he does kind of talk about how he doesn't even really feel it anymore. Like he's done it so many times, it's almost like a chore at that point where he just dies and goes back. So I mean, maybe it could have been explained a little bit better how he actually overcame that mentally. Yeah, but
that's possible.
Yeah. I was totally cool with it, and I was riding for Tao the whole book, just wanting it, you know, just seeing his drive to just keep going back and take that damage, and you know, mentally and physically to just keep going back and doing it. So that was just really, really fun and sort of like new and interesting to read about. But also the real answer probably is he's the main character.
So, how do you feel
the chosen one?
Exactly.
How do you feel about Tao inventing dual wielding, being the first person to think of carrying two swords instead of one?
This is a 2021 Alan brain looking back on this make-believe world. It's a little silly. I'll give you that.
Everyone's like, he's fighting with two weapons.
But it's really cool. I mean, and this is a trope that's been done in action movies before.
It is.
You know, like I've seen like, what? Two swords? I mean, like it's not new.
Like everybody uses a sword and shield, and he was just like, you know what? I don't want a shield.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, you're crazy. Like it's a little silly that literally no one ever picked up two swords and just like tried it, but
it's fun. I mean, I think that's the thing is like to some level I can just go with stuff like that where like
little stuff like that doesn't bother me, and they do kind of explain it a little bit of like they almost say that he's stupid for doing it because you can't defend yourself, you don't have a shield, like you're not going to be as strong with your left hand, and that, you know, comes back later as well. But it's sure I'll give you the fact that it can be kind of silly that literally no one else would like have done it. But
I mean, yeah.
No one thought to wield two swords before in the history of their warrior race.
Well, you know, I mean, it is interesting, I guess, on some level, because I think one of the big themes here is the way that the nobility is so sort of narcissistic and certain of their own power and dominance. I could see it also being a thing where like they're so sure of it and sure of like that they know the way to do it that they wouldn't feel the need to. Maybe I don't you know, I don't know. I
just the arrogance and the
like,
they just know better.
And I've got to say, like I do really enjoy an underdog story where I'm like, yeah, get those narcissistic guys. Like I
mean, everybody always hates the nobles, right? The nobles are always pieces of garbage.
Yeah.
So
it's
and
fun.
I was also reading Red Rising around the same time and the Poppy War. So I was all in on these just like angry, hate-driven, vengeance-wanting main characters.
I love it.
And Tao constantly reminded me of Darrow.
Yeah.
Darrow is a better character
and
definitely thinks more than Tao, and so does Rin, but I was kind of in this zone of like reading all these characters around the same time and really, really enjoying them. I mean, I will say that from book 1 to book 2, Evan Winter definitely improves on Tao personally for me, and making him a better, more rounded character, and also expanding on some of the side characters. And it's still a, you know, single POV story. It's still about him, but he does a better job of improving on all the things that I hear constantly complained about in book 1. So like, I kind of want to tell people, well, read book 2, like maybe it'll fix it, but But I always come back to, if you hated this book, book 2 is probably not going to change your mind. But if you were kind of like middle of the road to maybe liking it, I think book 2 will help that.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to try book 2 because I liked it pretty well. I definitely had some issues with it, but I'm curious to see kind of like what he does going forward. So that's interesting to hear. Yeah. I do think he had some like cool stuff. I think with the magic thing, especially that idea of playing with time in a way. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do that before.
I haven't either. The magic system, the whole thing with Isihogo, kind of
that was very
learning how to travel to like another realm and where there's literal demons that will like eat your soul. I mean, that was horrifying, and just the sort of like the way that he described what they looked like was terrifying, and the fact that that just like mentally breaks people and you can't stay in it too long, and like everything with the magic system is sort of tied into that, and it builds up more and more throughout the book to where it's not just a simple like you're going there to fight demons. It ties in with the dragons and the women's powers and how they enrage people and all of that. So like the way that he kind of created all that was super interesting.
Yeah.
And I had never read an African inspired fantasy before, so just it was refreshing to me to have a new setting and not just have another standard medieval castle kind of fantasy.
Yeah. I agree. Like, I like the setting. I thought the setting was cool. I mean, again, what happens at the end when it starts dealing with like colonialism and you know barbarians versus the conquerors, like that stuff got me really invested because I'm super interested in that stuff. And the magic system is unique and really interesting, but it requires having limitation, and Tao has no limitations. If Tao gets magic, which he doesn't currently have, but I have not read the second one, but if Tao gets magic, he is literally unstoppable because he no longer faces the consequence of using the magic. And that is something that I'm concerned about going forward. Alex, if you've read the second one and like it kind of addresses that and it's not really concerned, that's fine. I just don't know. But I do think the magic system is super cool. And I'm okay with the lack of dragons because I was huge into dragons when I was a kid, and I played Dungeons and Dragons, and every fantasy from the 90s had dragons in it, and every Dungeons and Dragons book
had because dragons are freaking cool.
Oh, I know. But I was so dragoned out that I don't really like dragons in my books anymore. And so the sparse use of the dragons in this, I actually was okay with. Like, I make the joke of like, there's no dragons in this book, but I'm kind of okay with it because dragons are OP. They always come out, everything's fire, everything's dead, molten slag, moving on.
I mean, that's kind of the point, though, because they explain that is dragons in this world, like Leslie said when we talked about it before, is they're kind of like nukes. Like, you call down dragons, they don't care who's there. Like, they're just going to burn everything.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so terrifying. And when he goes even beyond that, it's not just, like, people aren't taming dragons. They're almost like bending dragons to their will, holding them in Isihogo to use their power, and they're pissing them off. So when they do finally let go, or, I forget what the channelers or whatever they're called, if they die, like, if you stay too long in Isihogo and you start showing that light, like, you can actually die. And so many of them get trapped trying to hold these dragons there. So, like, that was super interesting to learn about too.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting the way that they ended up talking about the dragons in terms of the fact that they would like hold one of their young hostage as a way of controlling them. Like, I thought that introduced some interesting stuff in terms of like the power dynamics. And like, I joke about it, but also I wasn't that bothered by the lack of dragons either.
I thought it was cool that they were used selectively, honestly.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I just... like, I can see why not everybody would like this because it is a lot of action. And also, I kind of think this would work better for people who are okay with YA heroes because Tao reads to me a lot like a YA hero.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see that.
Which I'm okay with. Like, when I think of him as I think if he was older, he would have bothered me more, but because he's basically still a teenager, I was like, yeah, okay, sure.
You can almost like forgive it.
Yeah.
Because he's young and dumb.
Exactly. I'm like, you'll grow up, you'll learn. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, this should have been right up my alley because this, like, I love battles, and the battles are well written, despite the fact that he has bronze swords sparking when they hit each other. Bronze is a non-sparking metal. Bronze is a non-sparking metal.
You would know this, Alan.
I did. I literally was reading it, and I read that, and I was just reading, and I read that section where it's like the sword sparked, and I went past it, and then I stopped.
Wait a second.
I went back. I'm like, I don't think bronze sparks. And then I literally went to Google, and I'm like, does bronze spark? And they're like, bronze is not. I'm like, okay. And I don't know why I stopped. I don't know. I don't remember knowing that.
So
but
funny.
I was like, hang on a minute. But like, I love the battles. It just felt really clunky to me. And the thing, I think I've just read better organized, and again, first time author. Like I do understand that. So I think I just wasn't, I don't know, like I had just come off of reading a bunch of books that I really liked also. You know, I come off of Greatcoats, come off of the Senlin, like old books that I really loved. And, you know, it was just like, I was like, I didn't really care about the stakes, even though I liked the things that were happening. Like, I didn't care if Tao got revenge or not. I did like that he was killing everybody except the person that he wants to kill. He's sneaking up on him, and he goes, hey, dude, I'm coming for you. Why are you doing that? Just kill him.
Yeah.
Because he's stupid.
Yeah. I mean, he is. Yeah.
He got caught up in the moment and was feeling
But he literally thought, in that same scene, he thought, I've got to get him before he sees me. And then he yells at him.
Yeah, I thought of that too. I was like, dude, come on.
What are you? And the thing is, all of these things can still happen. I just wish Winter had done it better. Like, the guy still could have seen him and got away, but not in a dumb way like that. Like,
yeah. Well, then also, as far as just like, I guess, Tao's power level, because then he that's when he like 1v1s an enraged like Inganyama, like a full-blooded noble that's like powered up, and he just takes him one-on-one. So it definitely, I see the YA-ish there, I guess, because it's like, oh well, Tao's literally never gonna lose.
Yeah.
He just, the only battles he really loses are in Isihogo, where he can't technically die when he's doing it, or like his early duels before he's strong, because then he basically becomes overpowered.
Yeah.
But to me, it was just fun to watch that because he's so strong, just jumping into battle and basically just wrecking everybody. It was just super entertaining.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was relatively fun. I will say this. I listened to this one on audio, and I think that was probably a good choice, because I kind of think if I had read it physically, I would have been like, yeah, okay, you're fighting again. But like, listening to it was more interesting.
That's cool.
Who did the audio for that one?
That's a good question. I could look it up. But they did a good job. Like
it was Ray Romano.
Hold on, I have it in my Audible library.
Now I need that. I need Ray Romano reading Rage of Dragons.
So Tao.
I remember I was in Minnesota for work, and I just like found a bookstore because I wanted to get some books, and this is one that I picked up because of the cover. I was like, that looks super cool.
The cover is very cool.
It's awesome. So I ended up reading it, and I flew through it because it does not let up, and I was fully invested in it. But yeah, I mean, my other, I guess, like issue with it is, and maybe it's just, it couldn't happen in this book. Once Tao leaves like the town at the beginning, you just like never hear from anybody in his family ever again. Yeah. It's just kind of like that whole section's just like done forever.
Yeah, I wish it carried over more because it was really interesting. But yeah. So the audiobook is narrated by Prentice Onayemi.
Okay.
Who I don't know what else they've narrated. Oh, he did the second one as well. Oh, he's done like,
that makes sense.
Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass bio. Yeah, so but yeah, no, the narrator did a really good job, I thought.
Awesome.
And I think I think it was helpful for me getting through such a heavy action book using the audiobook, because I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, action scenes in books on audio are pretty awesome.
Yeah.
If you have a good narrator, it really kind of just like
it brings
makes
it
feel like a movie almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that was helpful.
So I mean, other than Tao, then what characters did you really, if any, did you feel sort of attached to, either of you?
I mean, Hadith. I liked Hadith and Uduak.
Yeah.
You know, I always like the strategist characters. Like, I'm always a big fan of the strategist characters. I like Kate in Poppy War. But like, really, unlike Kate, Hadith actually shows that he's a good strategic genius, other than us just being told that he is.
Yeah.
Like, I think Hadith actually has good strategy, and I like that Tao relies on him for that. As part of it, like, Tao as an unstoppable kind of weapon of mass destruction is worked into the overall strategy. So Hadith is like, this is what we're going to do. Tao, you're going to go do your thing, which is essentially carve a murder canyon wherever you're going. And the rest of us are going to, you know, work for this objective. And so I really liked that. Like, I liked his scale. I liked Jayed, even though it turned out he's a douchebag. Like, with what he's doing. And you know, Uduak, I always like the big guy too. It's just like I hate you, but you beat me, so now I don't. It's like he
starts calling him a little demon.
Yeah, he's Ragnar from Golden Sun.
Yeah. I'm really bad at character names, but the guy who's one of the guys he wants to kill, who fought his dad on behalf of the noble.
Oh, Kellen,
yeah. Yes. Kellen O'Carr.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like him too.
So I think he's really interesting because
he is.
You know, like, he has this interesting backstory. He's not sure, like, he does what he has to do, but he tries to make it better for people. So I found him to be a really interesting side character.
He tried to save Tao's dad in the beginning.
Yeah.
By only taking his hand, whatever, which Tao couldn't let go. But he's sort of like that. Not a nice person, but he's like, he has to fulfill his duty as part of, you know, the society that he's in.
Right.
But he's not a total garbage noble that just like, he's not the guy that claimed Tao, you know, hit him from behind or whatever, and then was like, I want everyone to die.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
He's not that piece of crap.
Yeah.
Speaking of Kellen, like, that's another thing, and this is just personal preference. I don't like when authors break the convention they've established. Like, the whole book is told only from Tao's perspective, except like 2 chapters that are not from, and I'm like, and Sanderson does this in Mistborn. All of a sudden, I have a third POV from Ellen's point of view, and I don't like that because I'm like, well, this whole book for 400 pages, you have told me that there is 1 or 2 viewpoints in this book, and all of a sudden you're going to add one at the end, like, because you couldn't figure out how to tell the story, you couldn't figure out how to tell these events from the 2 viewpoints you established. Like, for me, I would just rather them give it to me earlier because it annoys me. It's just my personal preference. So I was like, what's this Kellen chapter? What's this? Like, I liked it. I think Kellen's cool, but I'm like, what are you doing? Like, this is all from Tao's point of view, except this one from Kellen's point of view.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair critique. It doesn't bother me. That doesn't bother me in books.
It doesn't bother me.
But I can see where you're coming from, because I mean, it is true that it's done usually because the author can't figure out a better way to get information across. So that's fair.
Well, it's kind of like when Erickson does it, just literally in the middle of a page, just changes POVs and you don't know what the hell is happening.
Yeah, but I mean, there's like 50,000 you can choose from. So I mean, I don't know how many undead I need to be inside the head of. I've been inside the head of a bunch.
I can see that. I mean, honestly, though, as one of the main critiques of the book, which obviously he, you know, this is Tao's story, so he chose to write it that way. But I do feel like, and again, this is something that he does sort of build upon in book 2, is I think this kind of book would do wonders from like 3 or 4 POVs, because you could tell, you could have had Tao's story, you could have had a Kellen story, you could have had.
You could have had Zuri.
Exactly. You could have had Zuri actually be a character.
The natives could have had a POV, because you do kind of learn that Tao and his people, like, are kind of the invaders, and they're the ones that set up this terrible society. And Tao's kind of learning that, like, oh, are we like not the good people in this scenario?
Yeah.
Well, considering that all the training the girls are supposed to go through to be able to commune with the dragons, like we could have
not
easily
any of it.
Yeah, we could have easily have had a Zuri perspective.
Yeah,
for sure.
that would have been cool. I would have been.
Zuri needed that because Zuri just showed up when Tao needed to learn something.
Yeah, which was
for the most part
not great. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that could have been.
Yeah, that wasn't fantastic.
No. Okay, so one thing, tell me if I'm wrong about this, because I think this is accurate. So Tao is mixed, right? Like he had a noble mom.
I'm trying to remember.
Because I think
pure lesser.
No, because I think at the beginning that was the whole deal, is that his mom wanted nothing to do with him.
Oh, she was mid-class. She was a lesser noble.
So what's interesting to me is it seems like what I got out of this is he, through this book, has decided because of his mom's behavior to renounce that side of his family. And I found it so interesting, this whole thing of him pushing back on the idea that like half-blood people have more ability, when I'm like, yeah, but you are too, you're just lying about it. Like, am I wrong that that's a thing?
Yeah. I felt just squicked out by Jayed being like, hey, so I've just been collecting half-breeds. I don't actually believe in any of you.
Yeah.
And I was like, come on, Jayed.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing is for me is I was like, wait, but Tao also is. So like you think that he's the exception to the rule, but he's not. So I don't know. I don't know how to feel about the fact that there does seem to be some kind of basis to this genetic separation. Like I'm definitely kind of uncomfortable with that. And I'm wondering, it's another thing that I'm like wondering what he does with in future books, because the way it's set up right now, I'm like, I don't love this.
I mean, without spoiling anything, the caste system is just sort of what it is for the most part, from what I've seen, that it is just like the nobles are quote unquote better. And then there's lesser nobles, and then whatever Tao is, and the lesser. So it's like that just kind of exists, and the nobles are the leaders of the society, and they are being overthrown.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of learn that like other things are happening that are more important, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, the caste system is what it is. It's similar to Red Rising, minus all the like genetic mutations and stuff, because that's sci-fi and it's in the future.
It is interesting because it makes me wonder if kind of the way the caste system is set up is supposed to be like nobility is supposed to be a stand-in for whiteness. If you're talking about like inborn privilege in society, I think that is kind of interesting if that's the point of it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have to honestly read like what Evan Winter maybe was trying to do with that.
I'd be curious.
I don't know if he was pulling from like a society that existed or exists in Africa or somewhere else.
They're based on the one of the Zulu tribes.
Okay.
It is based on actual tribe from where his family is from.
Interesting.
And I do like the fact that I like his the motivation for setting out to write this book, which that he wanted his kids,
his son to have
to have a hero that looks like him, and I think that's awesome.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, my friggin' internet's just deciding to look ho hum, so I can't look up the tribe, but I'll let you know when I find it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I'll have to like read up a little bit on kind of his background, but I do think that's important, and I'm happy to see that this book has done relatively well, and I think it's gotten. It's funny, as much as like this conversation was sort of set up to be a for versus against, I feel like this has been pretty balanced in terms of like, it's not perfect, but there are cool things and it's worth reading maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely liked it more than either of you, but I mean, with time and conversations and thinking about like, there are things that I could talk about as critiques or things that don't quite work, but like I still absolutely loved it when I read it, and I still love it now, and I love the sequel. But I mean, there's I'm not like blinded to the fact that there are issues. Because I mean, every book has issues. I don't think I've loved a single book where I didn't have at least one big complaint about it.
Yeah.
It's the Xhosa Nation, the Xhosa people, which are part of the Zulu.
Yeah, it's like a weird,
or related to the Zulu.
Yeah. Interesting. That's cool.
I will push back on the blurb saying that this was Game of Thrones meets
Gladiator.
There's literally no politics in this freaking thing at all.
Barely.
Nothing about this is Game of Thrones at all.
They always do that. They always.
I could see the Gladiator comparisons, for sure. Yeah. But come on, guys.
Yeah. Well, as we said earlier, like Game of Thrones is definitely overused as a book comparison.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like Alan's video that he made months and months ago. Not everything can be Game of Thrones or has to be Game of Thrones.
Yeah. I made a video on that very thing because it's just like when I was when I first started BookTube, I was just getting back into fantasy. And so there's so many books I'd never heard of. And so while I'm looking up for fantasy books, every bloody book on the cover talks about how it's Game of Thrones. And I'm like, why? Like, why is everything Game of Thrones? And I refuse to believe that everything is I refuse to believe that all of these things are like Game of Thrones. I don't believe it.
Well, they did this too with like Black Leopard, Red Wolf. They called the African Game of Thrones. I was like, no, it's not. It's not.
Is that book any good? I haven't read it yet.
It's a really polarizing one. I think it's very, very good, but
it's super dark, right?
It's really dark. It has like all the triggers,
all the trigger warnings.
Yes. And like and the other thing about it is it's literary fantasy, which is not everybody's cup of tea. So I think they kind of mismarketed it, but he does what he set out to do very well. So, yeah.
I'm not sure I even know exactly what literary fantasy is, but I have the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. It's worth a try. Like it's like the style it's written in is more like literary fiction. It's got a lot of description and a lot of thematic things that it's dealing with. It's less about the action. I mean, there is action and there are things that happen, but like it's really about like what it's trying to say or do, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So let's jump. So we already talked about how there's basically like no real female representation in the book except for Zuri.
Yeah.
This will be one of the things that like didn't hit me like I thought it was supposed to. Did either of you care when Zuri died?
Oh no, I literally forgot to. You just mentioned it.
I think I was more like mad because I'm like, oh, the one female character we had who already wasn't great, now you're going to kill her off. Why? So he can like end up with the queen or something? Like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is one of the weirder, I guess, issues with the book is that, like you said earlier, that it's set up to be a queen rules everything, but there's like basically no women in the book.
Yeah.
There's just like no named like faceless characters that like kind of appear except for Zuri.
Well, and the queen is easily overthrown by
Well, yeah, like the women don't actually have power. Like it's all a name. And the women in the book are all sort of either, victims, like early on in the book when we have like the girl who's like raped and then murdered by a noble. So they're all like either victims or they're used more for the progression of Tao's plot, which unfortunately, I don't think it's that uncommon to see. And so I appreciate when I do find male authors of fantasy who do a good job of writing fully fleshed out female characters and don't use them that way. But sadly, like it's not that uncommon. But
Josiah Bancroft.
Josiah Bancroft, he's great.
I think it's a good thing for like this is why conversations like this are honestly more interesting because like I will admit that half the time when I read books, like I'm just so used to seeing that, whether it's a show or a book, that I'm just like, oh yeah, I mean that's just how these are all kind of told. And like my wife just watched Outlander and there is so much rape in that show.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, really?
The book has a lot too. The book is a lot. I read the first one and I was like, this is not for me.
Why?
There's just a lot.
I think that's a whole other conversation.
Okay.
But it's just, I guess to me, it's like, it doesn't necessarily bother me as much, but like it's interesting to me to to see that different perspective, because I'm like, oh, well, if I actually do think about it, like, yeah, that is kind of messed up that like, that's the reason that the women are in the book. And that's just kind of shitty.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like, I'm not somebody who thinks that rape should never exist in books, because I think it's part of the human experience. And like, like books somewhat reflect that. So some people feel that way. I don't. However, I do think, like in a best case scenario, you should be writing characters who are people, whether they are male or female, who have different personalities and have their own goals and motivations beyond just serving the purposes of your hero. And so what Alan was saying, like, I think Josiah Bancroft is one pretty good example of that. I also actually think Pierce Brown does a pretty good job of this as well in the Red Rising.
He gets better. Every single book.
Yes. Yeah.
The women get better.
He continues to improve, and he has really interesting women. So that's the thing is like, I think there are authors who are doing a good job of it, and I'm happy to see more of it. But unfortunately, I think traditionally it hasn't been done well, and this is not the best example.
Yeah,
that's a very, very fair criticism.
Yeah, I agree.
What are some of the things that you like that either of you did appreciate that? So like we talked about the magic system, we talked about Tau a lot. Like one of the things for me that I thought was interesting is you aren't really necessarily following a good guy. Like he is your protagonist because it's his revenge story, but like everything surrounding him, like the Zadine are having their lands just ravaged and taken from them by, these petty nobles squabbling and, this war going on between them and just trying to essentially conquer this whole place. But like that's just kind of the setting that Tau's story takes place. So I was honestly like itching for more of learning about the actual Zadine people. Same. Which I wanted to see more, because like they have like lizard mounts and shit in the beginning of the book. I was like, what are those things? And like there was like tons of fantasy like creatures in the very beginning that you don't see a lot of anymore in the rest of the book.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is like I think the world he's created and the magic system and like even the issues that come into play with the society are really, really interesting. But I do agree. I think like having this be a multi-POV book and doing a better job of fleshing out different characters would have made this a much stronger story. But it's cool. And I think that was my favorite thing about it was getting to know the magic system, getting to know the world and like the political system and structure. Like that was probably my favorite thing about the book.
What about you, Alan?
I mean, I thought the fights were really well written. They were high octane. I think the duels were written. I with as much freaking fighting is in this book, because it wasn't a ton of military action. It was a ton of Tau fighting repeatedly. I did not get bored with it. So I thought it was varied enough to where, and that's another reason where like I just get disappointed. I'm like, you're so skilled at writing these fight scenes, but you just didn't bother to look up that bronze swords don't spark. like, what are you doing, man? Like I thought you knew what you're doing. So I really enjoyed the fight scenes, and I enjoyed, like I said, the end where they start to deal with the politics of these of the conquered people, the Zadine and stuff.
Yeah.
And so that is the stuff that interested me the most.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. Well, I think this has been a good conversation, and definitely I think it's an interesting book. And so I think for anybody listening, like if this sounds like it would be up your alley, I think it's worth a look. I do want to read on in the series and kind of see what he does with book 2, because I think there's some good things to it. So awesome. Thank you guys for joining me with this.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Again, this has been Chapter 3 Podcast, and I'm your host, Bethany. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate and review the podcast so we can continue to reach more listeners. You can follow us on Twitter at Chapter 3 Podcast, and you can also find me on YouTube at Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Plus, we now have a brand new YouTube channel for Chapter 3 Podcast, which will be linked in the show notes. So that's where all of these episodes, if you're looking for them on YouTube, you will now find them there. The next episode will be available in 2 weeks, and this episode's bonus content will be available to patrons in the next few days. Thanks for listening.